Chapter 11. Samuel entered Cavern Hall. The sight of the squirrel maid slumped like a sack against Samuel's chest, seemingly leaking blood onto the front of his tunic, and the two young creatures trailing ashen-faced behind him seemed to set off a firework explosion. Before long, the gathering Redwallers had formed a path from the doorway of Great Hall to the doorway of the infirmary. Facing that barricade of creatures, Samuel raised his voice, hoping to make himself heard.
"Get out of the way, for God's sake! Get out of the way!"
A few creatures were sensible enough to move to the side, and as Samuel jostled his way through the narrow gap that this had provided him with, he shouted back to Marianne.
"Miss Marianne, don't just stand there. You know where find Sister Bethelle, don't you? Fetch her quick like."
Marianne shook herself out of her daze and hastened off to obey, leaving Salome to grope her way towards the back of the hall. The abbess and Sister Bethelle arrived simultaneously. Although the abbey beasts were docile enough to clear a path for these two, allowing them to enter the infirmary, the abbess was forced to shriek in order to make herself heard. But for that she was fortunate, for she did not receive a reply to any of her questions or a response to any of her commands. Then Skipper Johndam appeared. His very presence brought complete silence and order to the hall, even before he roared,
"Shut up, all ya!"
The abbey beasts retreated from the hall, one by one, in twos and threes. Samuel was free to carry Marianne into the infirmary. Stooping beside the nearest bed, he deposited her onto the blanket, and Sister Bethelle hurried over to her side. Within moments, the little form had been shrouded in a quilt, and her head lay in Sister Bethelle's lap. Several times the old squirrel sister had dunked her paw into a bowl of cold water and doused Mariette's face, all to no avail. She shook her head.
"Look at it, this lump, and she shows no signs of reviving."
Only the abbess seemed to have regained some of her composure. She knelt beside the bed to examine the lump more carefully.
"She received a blow to the skull, did she not, Samuel?"
Samuel stared down at the blood splotches on his tunic. Dark, reddish-black, still damp.
"Aye, Mother Abbess, something like that, I suppose."
Skipper Johndam, determined not to shout again, was forced to resort to a gritted-teeth whisper.
"Something like that. Listen to me, mate. This ain't no something like that matter. This may be a matter of life and death for that little maid. You saw that blood. It's still splattered all over your tunic. And on that topic, go and change out of that thing. A meeting may need to be called, and if the abbey beasts get a good glimpse of that thing, they'll go insane. Shift yourself."
Great Hall was packed from end to end. Every creature sat upright, ashen-faced, but silent, listening as Marianne spoke.
"We didn't go to do it, Mother Abbess.
Her voice was quivering.
I oughtn't to have let Salome do it. We hadn't any way of knowing it would. Oh, Mariette's dead. Dead. And all of Mossflower's been overrun by vermin."
The squirrel maid collapsed face down upon the table's surface, gasping and heaving, like a creature who had nearly drowned. But before pandemonium could erupt, the abbess addressed her sharply.
"Now, miss, you will cease this foolishness immediately. Mariette is alive. Sister Bethelle felt her pulse. Sit up now and draw in 3 deep breaths. Shouting and crying will only make every beast worse."
Marianne did as she was told. The abbess passed her a handkerchief.
"There's a good creature. Now, what happened? What did Salome do?"
Marianne wiped her eyes.
"It's our fault, Mom. I never ought to have stood by and watched Maria eat that pasty. She didn't want to eat it, but Salome tempted her into it, and she was so hungry. If it hadn't been for us, she'd have never gotten ill, and she'd have never gotten hit in the head."
Samuel glanced from Marianne's face to Salome, who was studying the floor.
"Tempted her? What in all the mossflowers going on here?"
Abbess Elinor folded her paws in a no-nonsense manner.
"Master Samuel, please tell us all what happened."
Samuel explained that the friar had sent the 4 young creatures into the woods for fuel, that the maids had stopped in a clearing to eat, and that he had gone off to search for a suitable tree. He had returned to find that Mariette was feeling unwell, and insisted upon lying there, so he had taken Marianne and Salome along with him.
I chopped for a bit and then I went back to the spot to check out on Muriel, but she wasn't there. I wandered about looking for her, calling her name. That's when I stepped into another clearing, and there she was, standing there, simpering away. And 4 or 5 awful-looking varmints were closing in on her, great, ugly, patch-furred creatures. One had a spear aimed at her, and another had a strip of cloth in one paw and a coil of rope over his shoulder.
He paused, for he realized then that his paws were clenched. He managed to unclench them and took several deep breaths, just as Marianne had done.
Yelled at the squirrel mate to run to me, though a heavy axe wouldn't have been much good as a weapon, but she just looked at me, still with that great smile on her face, and said, "Samuel?" Said it over and over again like an echo. I kept shouting, but she wouldn't budge. I had to make a lunge, and use that axe as well as I could. All the time, one of the creatures kept yelling to the others to knock me down first, but not to slay me. As I got near Muriel, she just fell to the ground senseless. I scooped her up and made off with her. Her head was lolling over my shoulder, and when one of the scum flung the sling stone, it got her, not me.
And this is what caused the lump on her head.
Abbess Elinor said softly. She paused.
But what of the sickness that you mentioned, and the turnover that Marianne mentioned? What is all of this?
Skipper Johndam, however, was slowly beginning to understand.
Marianne gets drunk off of bread and such things, just as Brother Aaron gets drunk off of beverages, if you'll pardon my words.
His eyes came to rest upon Salome.
And she didn't want to eat this turnover, but Miss Salome tempted her to take it, Miss Marianne says. Is that true?
Salome squirmed a little. She attempted a sheepish smile.
Aye, but I hadn't a clue it had harm her, Skipper. I knew she was hungry, and the fruit and cheese wasn't enough, so I figured I'd...
Her voice trailed off, for the skipper's gaze had not shifted from her, and Samuel too was staring at her, apparently speechless. Abbess Elinor took the floor.
Salome, Samuel, have you offered any other food or drink to Marianne since you arrived at the Abbey?
Still, Samuel was unable to speak, so Salome answered for herself and for him.
Samuel offered her a scone some part of the morning, Mother Abbess, and I helped Marianne to make a sweetmeat basket for her.
Skipper Johndam gave a mirthless laugh.
Bread again, aye, and sweetmeats. Well, there's a wealth of meaning in that. Pray tell me, what sort of sweetmeats?
Salome's voice was small.
Just some candied fruit and nuts.
Skipper half smiled.
An amazing tale, ain't it? Master Samuel and the little maids are taking a stroll, when Miss Salome hands Miss Marianne a bit of turnover that causes her to drop senseless in the middle of the woods. But it's quite all right, only a mistake, except for a few things. She just happened to drop senseless in the mid of a pack of vermin, and while our Master Samuel was telling us about her sudden blackout, Miss Salome forgot to mention the turnover, till Miss Marianne kindly told us about it.
Even in his present mood, Samuel felt that he must place a protective arm about his sister's shoulders.
It was the shock that made her forget, Skipper. You'd do the same in her place.
Skipper Johndam widened his eyes in mock understanding.
Ah, it was the shock made her forget. But if Miss Marianne hadn't brought it up, would she have ever remembered? Now, don't start bristling, mate. Bless your heart. I never accused you of a crime. Just show me one little thing, and I'll let you retire to the infirmary. All those heroics with the chopping axe must have worn you out. Tell me, where's that blade of yours?
Without turning his head, Samuel spoke softly.
Salome, you dropped that thing, didn't you?
Salome avoided the eyes of all the creatures.
I mean, no. I lost it in that mess of leaves and shrubs.
Skipper Johndam smiled again.
I see. First the dagger was dropped. Now it's lost in the foliage. Irrecoverable, eh? Tell me, Miss Salome, How heavy was that dagger hilt?
Salome only shrugged.
Reckon it was heavy enough to clunk a senseless squirrel maid with, and make a lump that looked like a slingstone lump, or to knock her with, 'cause she wasn't faintin', or dying fast enough.
At that moment, it seemed as if decorum and sanity flew out the window. Marianne sprang to her feet, crying,
In God's name, Master Johndam,